Hello family and friends, welcome back. So to follow up from the last video, I promised this. So from Exterminate All the Brutes, chapter 66, The Friends. See if you think any similarities here, because we never learn. People were screaming from the rooftops even back in the day, but people in their day, they didn't care. So people had to do it a different way. They had to write. When people finally read the books, some of them got it, some of them didn't. Just like in movies, people think, oh, it's just a movie. Anyway, The Time Traveller in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, 1895, takes us with him into a future world in which the human family has divided itself into two species: the weaker flower children of the upper world and the dark creatures of the underworld, the Morlocks. It is as if Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde had bred and created two different families, each of which populates the future. As if superego and alter ego had been separated and each created a people of his own. As if the working class of darkest England had been forced down below the earth and had created another race there. As if the inhabitants of darkest Africa had lived in an underground life in the actual heart of the empire. Of these potential interpretations, the last mentioned is the one to carry the story on. The Morlocks turn out to be the cannibals, and they have the power. The beautiful people on the surface are simply fattened cattle the cannibals capture, slaughter, and eat. Hatred and fear seize the traveller. He longs to kill the Morlocks. He wants to go straight into the darkness, killing the brutes. This killing in Wells is both horrific and voluptuous. The time traveller falls asleep as he sits there in the darkness, and when he wakes, the Morlocks are onto him, soft and repugnant. He shakes the human rats off him and starts striking out. He enjoys the feeling of swishing iron pipe smashing into juicy flesh and crushing bones. The leading philosopher of the day was Herbert Spencer. As a child, he had been very strictly brought up. The principle of this upbringing became for Spencer the innermost secret of life. All living things are forced to progress through punishment. Nature, remember Kissinger said, nature appears to be an immense reformatory in which ignorance and incompetence are punished with poverty, illness, and death. The Time Machine is an experiment with Spencer's theory of evolution. The novel shows how mankind, as the time traveller puts it, commits suicide by minimizing the pain that is the mother of intelligence and evolution. Wells's book, which we know Conrad also read, was called Island of Dr. Moreau, 1896. In this, the opposite possibility is investigated, maximizing the pain, thereby hastening evolution. Dr. Moreau uses his surgical skill to create a human being out of animals. He tortures the animals so that pain will increase the pace of their evolutionary progress. Each time I dip a living creature into the bath of burning pain, I say, this time I will burn out all the animal. This time I will make a rational creature of my own. After all, what is 10 years? Man has been 100,000 in the making. Dr. Moreau has created 120 creatures, of which half are dead, but he has not succeeded in creating a real human being. As soon as the doctor takes his hand off the creatures, they revert to bestiality. The animal in them is strongest at night, in the dark. One night, the puma tears itself free and kills its torturer. The monsters rebel and take over power on the island. The narrator sees, day by day, the way they become hairier, their foreheads lower, and they growl instead of speaking. When he has saved himself and returned back to civilization, he sees the same there. Human beings seem to him to be tormented. Animals soon revert to all fours. He chooses solitude beneath the stars. It is out there in the starry sky that whatever is more than animal within us must find its solace and its hope. And so, in hope and solace, my story ends. The Island of Dr. Moreau can be read as a story of colonialism. Just as the colonizer civilizes the lower, more animal races with the whip, Dr. Moreau civilizes the animals with torture. Just as the colonizer tries to create a new kind of creature, the civilized savage, Dr. Moreau tries to create the humanized animal. In both cases, the means is terror. Just like Kurtz, he teaches his created creatures to worship him as God. In An Outcast of the Islands, which Wells reviewed in May 1896, Conrad assembles the criticisms of the colonialists in the image of the invisible whites who kill without even being present. Perhaps it was Conrad who inspired Wells to write another story of colonialism, The Invisible Man. See, there are agents of the New World Order everywhere. Invisible. You don't know who they are. We don't know who the men behind the curtain are. There are some who come like from behind the curtain. They're still on the sides, but they're never front and center. That's what politicians are for. The sneaky men on the sides who no one really pays attention to. This is the story of Kemp, a man who, owing to a much too successful scientific experiment, has made himself invisible and does not know how to get his visibility back again. At first, he is desperate about his position, but he soon realizes it can be exploited, as no one can see him. He can commit any outrage he likes without being punished. No one can stop him from killing anyone who resists his reign of terror. Invisibility has made him inhuman. He is mad, said Kemp. Inhuman. He is selfishness. Pure selfishness. Were also the words Conrad chose when he described to his publisher the main theme for Heart of Darkness. The men representing civilization out of the colonies were invisible, not only in the sense that their guns killed at a distance, but also in that no one at home really knew what they were doing. Cut off from their native country by enormous distances, poor communications, and impenetrable jungles, they exercised imperial power without any control from home. Charles Dilke had taken up these questions in Civilization in Africa in the summer of 1896. They were discussed in 1897 in connection with some articles in the Times by Benjamin Kidd, and again in 1898 when the articles came out in book form under the title Control of the Tropics. Wells was topical as usual. Conrad had already taken up this theme when he found it in Dilke and wrote An Outpost of Progress about the two rogues who became more and more inhuman when no one could see them. On November 17th, 1898, he asked Wells if he could send him The Invisible Man because he had mislaid his own copy. On December 4th, he praised it enthusiastically in a letter to Wells, and at Christmas, Conrad wrote to his young relative, Anila Zagloska, and urged her to read it. The Invisible Man was one of the books Conrad had just read when he was writing the story of Kurtz. The letter to Zagloska also recommends Wells' most recent book, War of the Worlds, 1898. Criticism of colonialism in this book is even more pronounced, perhaps because it was written in 1897 Jubilee year, during the orgy of self-satisfaction the British Empire was indulging in at home. In Wells's novel, London is attacked by an extraterrestrial master race. The Martians have lived in perpetual cold, which has sharpened their brains and enabled them to invent spaceships and death rays. They envelop London bit by bit in a cloud of black gas, an impenetrable, irresistible, killing darkness. The story seethes with words that also have a significant function in Heart of Darkness. Darkness, blackness, extermination, brutes, horror. The Martians' weapons kill like an invisible hand. They are as superior to those of the British as the British are superior to those of the coloured peoples. And just as the British consider themselves to have the right to conquer the lands of the lower races, the Martians think they have the right to conquer the earth, taking it from people they regard as lower species of animal. As Wells wrote, before we judge them too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon the animals, such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but also upon its own inferior races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept of the existence in a war waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? In the London area, humanity is soon exterminated, down to about a few stragglers. The narrator meets one of them on Putney Hill. He suggests future life and resistance in the sewers. The risk is that the humans will go savage, degenerate, into a kind of large wild rat. The extremes of the situation are motives for extreme situations. We can't have any weak and silly. Life is real again. And the useless, the cumbersome, the mischievous have to die. They ought to die. They ought to be willing to die. It's a sort of disloyalty after all, to live and taint the race. When that was written, Adolf Hitler was just 8 years old. The riddle of malaria was solved in 1897, when Wells wrote this novel. Just as malaria had long been the natives' best protection against the white conquerors, the bacteria in the novel became man's protection against the Martians. It is the bacteria that save humanity. The Martians have conquered the whole earth, only to fall victim to its smallest, most insignificant inhabitants. Just as we have been successful at one time, we should not think the future belongs to us, Wells warns. In the case of every other predominant animal the world has ever seen, I repeat, the hour of its complete ascendancy has been the eve of its complete overthrow. Excuse me. Wells had studied biology and paleontology under Thomas Huxley, and his popular science articles demonstrate a special interest in extinction. On Extinction, 1893, for example, deals with the saddest chapter in biological science, describing the slow and inexorable extinction of struggling life. In the long galleys of the Geological Museum are the records and judgments that have been engraved on the rocks. Example, Atlantosaurus, whether it was through some change of climate, some subtle disease or subtle enemy, these titanic reptiles dwindled in numbers and faded at last altogether, save for the riddle of their scattered bones. It is as if they had never been. And if you know anything about dinosaurs, like dinosaurs, they just all of a sudden just appeared in this small period of time. And over all these centuries, nobody ever found or discovered a dinosaur bone. And then in this small period of time, dinosaurs came out of nowhere. It's just... The long roll of paleontology is half filled with the records of extermination. Whole orders, families, groups and classes have passed away and left no mark and no tradition upon the living fauna of the world. Many fossils of the older rocks are labelled of doubtful affinity. Nothing living has any part like them. They hint merely at shadowy dead subkingdoms, of which the form eludes the zoologist. They are index fingers pointing into the unfathomable darkness and saying only one thing clearly, the word extinction. Even in the world today, the forces of extinction are at work. In the last 100 years, human beings have swarmed all over the globe and shoved one species of animal after another over the edge of the precipice. Not just the dodo, but hundreds of families and species. The annihilation of the bison was swift and complete. Seals, Greenland whales, and other animals are fated with the same cruel destiny. Their situation is almost beyond our ability to comprehend, Wells writes. Our earth is still warm from human beings, our future apparently full of human life. The most terrible thing we can imagine is a desolated earth in which the last human being, utterly alone, stares extinction in the face. In April 1897, Wells is writing War of the Worlds. The English newspaper Social Democrat published a story marked with the same biting irony, the same rebellious pessimism. The piece was called Bloody Niggers. I've read this before, I think so. But it's worth another read. Why did God create man? Was it out of carelessness or will? We don't know. But in all events, man exists, black, white, red and yellow. Far back in history, Assyrians, Babylonians and Egyptians lived and fought, but God was aiming all the time at something different and better. He let Greeks and Romans appear out of the darkness of barbarity to prepare the way for the race that from the start was chosen to rule over mankind, namely the British race. Limited islanders baptized with mist, narrowed by insularity, swollen with good fortune and wealth. Lower races live in Africa, Australia and America, and on the thousands of islands in the South Sea. They perhaps have different names and petty differences between them, but all of them are essentially niggers, bloody niggers. Nor are Finns or Basques, or whatever they are called, anything to be reckoned with. They are just another kind of European nigger, destined to disappear. It's interesting to go back and look at the ancestry of Finns, and we all know about Basques because of the Moors and everything. But the Finns is very interesting, very interesting. There's a YouTube channel, NYT, where this lady, she goes into it a lot. Niggers remain niggers, whatever the colour they are, but the archetype is found in Africa. Oh, Africa, God must have been in a bad mood when he created that continent. Why otherwise fill it with people who are doomed to be replaced by other races coming from outside? Would it not have been better to make the nigger white, so that in all good time they would become Englishmen, instead of giving us all the trouble of exterminating them? And here's a nigger brought up in England reading this to you. Niggers have no guns, so no rights. Their land is ours. Their cattle and fields, their wretched household utensils, and all they possess is ours, just as their women are ours to have as concubines, to thrash or exchange, ours to infect with syphilis, leave with child, outrage, torment, and make by contact with the vilest of our vile, more vile than beasts. Our bishops scream to high heaven when the Armenians are violated by Turks, but say nothing about the much worse crimes committed by their own countrymen. The hypocritical British heart beats from all except those their own empire drowns in blood. The God who has created people like us must not he have been a fool? The author of this scream was the Scottish aristocrat socialist R.B. Cunningham Graham. After an adventurous life in South America, he had returned to his native country and begun a new career as a political writer. A few months after Bloody Niggers was printed, Graham read An Outpost of Progress and recognized a soulmate in the criticism of imperialism and hatred of hypocrisy. He wrote to Conrad, and with that begins a correspondence remarkable in its seriousness, intimacy, and intensity. Graham became Conrad's best friend. The two friends always loyally praised each other's stories and articles, but in one case Conrad's reaction is much stronger than usual. This is when, in June 1898, he read Bloody Niggers, by then over a year old. It is good, he writes, very good, but... He switches into French. But my dear friend, you spread yourself too thin. Your thoughts drift around like wandering knights when they ought to be kept gathered together in firm and penetrating battle array. And why preach to the already converted? Conrad continues. Am I being stupid? Honor, justice, compassion, and freedom are ideas that have no converts. They are only people without knowledge, without knowing, understanding, or feeling, who intoxicate themselves with words, repeat words, shout them out, imagining and believe them, without believing in anything else but profit, personal advantage, and their own satisfaction. Let me read that again. Am I stupid? Honor, justice, compassion, and freedom are ideas that have no converts. There are only people without knowing, understanding, or feeling, who intoxicate themselves with words, repeat words, shout them out, imagining they believe in them, without believing in anything else but profit, personal advantage, and their own satisfaction. The criticism of the language Conrad made in the summer of 1896, great words are nothing but sounds, is repeated here. Sharpened to extreme despair, words fly away and nothing remains. Do you see? Absolutely nothing, you man of good faith, nothing at all. One moment and nothing remains except a lump of dirt, a cold dead lump of dirt, out into black space, spinning round in extinguished sun. Nothing, neither thought, sound, nor soul, nothing. Conrad calls Graham an homme de foi, a man of good faith. Conrad neither wanted nor was able to have anything to do with Graham's socialism or with politics in general. He was his father's son, and he knew what politics led to. Politics had killed his mother, broken his father, made him an orphan, and driven him into exile. Graham, with his secure national identity, could perhaps afford politics. Conrad, writer in exile, could not. He could love and admire his father's politics in Graham, but he also hated them and could never forgive what they had done to his father. Who today could be called a Hondifoy, a man of good faith. The species seemed to have died out. Graham's problems, however, remain utterly recognizable, his despair as well. It is only his faith and his hope that have been taken away from us. Fantastic. So I hope you understand why I read that, to just see the similarities from the last video, the mindsets, War of the Worlds and everything. We think we have the right to colonize Mars. You know I don't believe in space, but should we be allowed in space when we can't even sort things out down here? If we were to come up and meet another species in space and they turned out to be more vulnerable, weaker than us, we were more powerful than them, wouldn't we conquer them? Wouldn't we destroy them? Wouldn't we take advantage? Wouldn't we take their stuff? You know we would, as human beings. We don't deserve space, if there is such a thing as space. No. And if we were to come to meet another species stronger than us, and they saw what we were like, they'd either give us a wide berth, or they would probably seek to destroy us because of who we are and what we're like. See, we have these people making decisions for us. Who would you prefer to make the decision for us? Because as I read before in the last book, you know, these attitudes, and they use the clean methods to try and reduce the population, the clean methods, which obviously we've been living under, those clean methods. But as I said, time is running out and those clean methods ain't really working. So they have the bombs and war as another option. And you can see it building up. So out of all these superpowers and certain parts of the earth, who has to go? Is it Europe? Is it Africa? Is it the Americas? Is it Asia? Who has to go? Now obviously as times have changed, they had scheduled us exterminate all the brutes, but times have changed. Plus, thinking as a Bible sense, they cannot destroy the children of Israel. Plus, they're not really sure of that land. Like I say, after reading the Bible, I know that land is thirsty for European blood. So obviously, I'm thinking they can't decide between each other. So now it's a kind of, okay, we'll kill your people, I'll kill your people, you kill my people. And obviously it's the working class, obviously. See, people like that were trying to tell us. H.G. Wells, Orwell, many others, trying to tell us. Nobody was listening in their day, so they had to write books. People believed the propaganda of the press in that day, like it was a great battle, and these people are savages, and just the same today. We believe what we're told by the press, by the ruling class. Nobody wants this. But it's going to come down to it. Who would you rather decide on the fate? Who gets to live or die? Who gets to inherit the earth? God or man? Because they're obviously going to save themselves because they're rich and because they're smart. And as I said in the last video, That's why I think we're going back to basics, because we don't need these smart people. That's how we got here in the first place. Your wisdom should only go so far. And human beings weren't supposed to know certain things because we can't be trusted. We cannot be trusted. That's it. 3 minutes. Okay, the movie Ad Astra, really good film. First time I watched it, I wasn't even really paying attention. Commercial break came on, I turned it over, forgot to come back to it. But I watched it again, I really enjoyed it. Watching it the third time, oh man, really good film. Brad Pitt and Tommy Lee Jones. This is a film about a father and son. It's about men, basically, men of science. So this man, he's gone into space. He's gone rogue. And you can see the similarity between the days of the pirates and stuff in the seas. And they've sent his son, who's now an astronaut, to go and find his father. He's the only one who's likely to find him. He's the only one who can bring him back. So he goes to find him, and he finds his father, and he knows his father. He finds his father. He finds out his father's done some horrific things, but you know, that's his dad. He loves him. He's the only one who really knows. Now his dad's gone nuts because obviously the pursuit of knowledge, legacy, his life's great work, being immortalized in the history books. That's what he's just totally obsessed with. So he finally finds his father, but he finds out his father's done something horrific. You see, the rest of the crew, they wanted to get home, see their families, but his father was just obsessed with the life's great work. No, we're going deeper into space, beyond the stars. This is what we're here for. His father just wanted to carry on. In the end, he does. He finds his father's great work, and he ends up bringing it home. He tries to bring his father home, but his father doesn't want to know. He loves his father. He realizes he's a monster. He knows his father is a monster. But the pursuit of knowledge, the legacy, and being immortalized has turned his father crazy and turned him into an animal. So his father dies in space. These are the kind of men we're dealing with. It's that tale. But he loves his father. He always knew he was a monster, and he understands what the world has done to his father.